Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Pele Yoetz, and today we're talking about Gila, which means rejoicing, and it's a very short lesson today, and I'm going to kind of put some explanation on it because if you were to read it outright, today's lesson, you would kind of feel like some of the things that we learn in Judaism in today's time, how is this applicable to me? I'm not really sure what this means, and ironically enough, much like the previous lesson, I feel like this lesson is packed with practical and useful information because it deals with something that we find ourselves in a position on a daily basis. And whenever we're with even one other person, I can assure you that today's lesson really, you're going to have to draw back onto what you're learning today and start to put this into practice. And I bet you, as you become aware of it, you're going to really see how often we fall into the pitfalls of the traps that are laid out in today's lesson. And ironically enough, today's lesson is also kind of tied in to something we daven every day in Shachris. And one of the things we go through is the 6 remembrances. And it's number 5 of the 6. And it talks about the remembrance of Miriam. And it says, remember what HaShem, your God, did to Miriam on the way when you departed from Egypt. And in my opinion, I think that this statement, and I'll get into it a little bit more, is very closely connected with what we're going to learn today. So we're going to get into it. It says, it is written in Tehillim 2:11, and rejoice with trembling. And our sages in Berachot 30b commented, there should be trembling in the place of rejoicing. Such is the way of men of war when they see their enemy overcoming them. They raise a battle cry and scream against the threatening army. Likewise, in a place of rejoicing, a man's Yetzirah attacks him because he mistakenly thinks that it has fallen into his hand. The fear of Hashem is not before his eyes, since he is totally engaged in celebration and joy, and the Yetzirah deceives him and makes him forget the rock of his sanctity. So this portion here, this is exactly where it ties in. And with that remembrance of Miriam. So now what does this have to do with all of us today? And I think a lot of people will think, what does remembering Miriam have to do with my life today? And you'd be surprised. At the second portion of that sentence, remember what HaShem your God did to Miriam on the way when you departed from Mitzrayim. So on the way when you departed, it almost seems like there's a repetition. But what this is saying, very much like this opening here from Harav Papo Alav Shalom, is that remember the way that we're conducting ourselves when we go out, right? When we get into any social settings, but in this one they're using parties and things of that nature. But let's break it down even further. Okay, so there's simchas, there's parties, you're at the shul, you're at work, you're at the grocery, you're talking with your neighbor. Again, even if you're plus one other person, already there's going to be a battle. And what is that battle? That suddenly we loosen our guards and we forget the way we're supposed to conduct ourselves. And this tends to lead to a path that's getting ready to go down with Lashon Hara and Has v'Shalom Shemra, because at least Lashon Hara we're talking has a truth in there. Shemra, we're just talking an evil speech, Has v'Shalom. And it's very easy when you're by yourself to serve Hashem and hit. I think we're much more successful when we're by ourselves, but we don't live by ourselves, and we're not a community of people that we're not islands unto ourselves. Our whole history has been that of being together, right? Strength in numbers. So this is a problem that we're going to encounter every single time if we're not aware. But sometimes once we're aware, we don't know how to handle the situation. So we're going to find out a little bit more about some of the things that the Rav has said has been good remedies to really help us when we get into this predicament. So it says, then he must raise a battle cry and scream. The fool, however, increases involvement in prohibited matters, looks at illicit objects, and indulges in all kinds of different prohibitions that result from excessive eating and drinking. So again, very much like, when people go out to war or to battle or whatever it is, whenever there's a competition, you ever notice there's like those pep talks This is exactly what the Rav is saying. Sometimes we need to have a pep talk with ourselves. And sometimes we need to do it, if hopefully privately, because if you do it out loud, people will be like, oh my gosh, like that's it. They'll really loosen their guards and they'll start talking about you like she's really lost it. I think we have to speak to the Rav like she's talking to herself. But sometimes I think that if you are in a moment and you're even with other people, you have to give yourself that kind of pep talk that you can kind of remember yourself on the way that you should conduct yourself. And again, sometimes we really start to lose ourselves whenever we've had too much to drink or we've eaten too much, and all of a sudden it's like eat, drink, and be merry. But again, a lot of our problems are coming from what's coming out of our mouth. So it says, before he enters a place of celebration, he will accept upon himself not to eat and drink too much, not to engage in excessive conversation, and not to partake of other prohibition associated with rejoicing. In the midst of his happiness, he will remember the pure fear of God, and this is the special device that prevents wine from harming him or making him act irrationally. This story has already been told by the Baal Shem Tov, who once drank a large glass of very strong beer, thinking it was wine, and he almost fainted. He immediately closed his eyes, and in a brief moment regained his composure, and as if drinking had not affected him at all. And his disciples asked him what remedy he employed, and responded, "You must know what our sages said. Wine is harsh. Fear causes sobriety. There is no fear like that of HaShem, the splendor of his greatness. And therefore, right away, when I deeply thought about the fear of God, the effect of the beer passed. One also needs to fulfill the mitzvot, remembering the ways in which he angered Hashem, and remembering Yerushalayim, just like our sages say in Bitzah 15b, interpreting the verse Shemot 28. Remember the Shabbat and keep it holy. Remember it at all time. One might forget. So too, in these matters, the primary obligation is remembering during happy and joyous occasion when one might otherwise forget them. So this is another great protective device to prevent a person from deviating from the proper norm and to keep him on the straight path in all ways. So again, fear really is a powerful motivator. I think that, if you were to if we were to think for a second, when we are, like, let's say you're ill and you can't move, you have body, you're hurting. But Chas v'shalom, like one of your kids gets hurt, all of a sudden you got all this koyak and strength. The same thing, also happens when we think about, I think a lot of more popular Ravs these days are they're very vocal about telling you what the consequences of some of our actions are, and that has been a powerful motivator to really put people on the straight path. Baruch Hashem, that is, the outcome. Fear really can change the direction of where you see your life going. So sometimes we have to give ourselves these pep talks before we get into these situations, and we have to make a game plan, much like anything else. Like sometimes when you go to shopping, in my case, like CVS, where I go in and I say, I'm going to buy this, and that, and that's it. And I have to really put myself, because if not, I'll come out with the whole store. It's the same thing with this. You really have to make a game plan and you have to stick to it. And sometimes you have to reiterate what the plan was and remind yourself that we have a game plan, because what you fail to realize, like myself, like many of us do, is that at that moment when the chatter starts, the chacharas, like we say in Spanish, that is when you're really, you're on candid camera. So smile, okay? Either this moment is going to go down for all time like a fail, you're going to go down in flames, Chas v'shalom, or you're going to really rise above. Now remember, this is something, you take it, you learn it, you internalize it, and you have to put it into practice, because there's probably more chances than not that in the beginning it's going to be a really rough go, because all of a sudden you're aware of how many times you're in this situation. And again, not just for parties, when you go to work, when you're with your neighbor, when you're with your friend, your family, we have to be careful. All of a sudden, we tend to, again, let our guards down. We start talking about what so-and-so wore at shul, what so-and-so bought. Did you hear about this one? Did you hear about that one? And we start to bring problems upon ourselves. very, very devastating consequences. So this really is a practical lesson that is, I think, again, so applicable to today's time, but we struggle so greatly in this area. So, make the game plan, make the game plan, take HaShem with you. He's already there. Make him part of the game plan, and be honest with HaShem about where you're holding in this. Very difficult for a lot of us. So again, short, simple, sweet, very powerful. And that's it for today. And I hope we'll all be together again soon. Bezrat HaShem.